What is the truth in the stories we are told? We've been given a story of a world fueled by separation. We've become separate from one another, separate from the earth, ultimately separate from the true nature of ourselves. It's time we learn the truth. It's time you rewrite your story. It's time to realign with who it is that you really are. This is the fifth dimension.
You are infinite and eternal. We are infinite and eternal.
Our natural essence, we could say, is simply being.
We have this awakening coming together as a perfect storm.
We're ready for this. We have the capacity inside. We just got to find that.
All right. Everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension Podcast. We're on the air and returning to the show. We have the one and only Jacqueline Claire. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing? It's been a few months.
It has been. I'm doing great. And I'm so happy to be here. I'm officially a returning guest now.
You are.
That's a big deal.
That's an exclusive club, actually. I think the number, we have over 100 episodes, and I think the number of returning guests is still in the single digits. So it's an exclusive club. Very exclusive. So I've been watching some of your YouTube videos, and I've loved a lot of the topics you've been bringing up. Actually, first, I want to ask, you released your book. How's your book rollout going? I didn't ask that before the podcast, but I want to hear about your book. How's that gone?
Yeah, sure thing. So I have a children's book, or children of all ages, called Noble Beings. And it's a compilation of quotes, very short, bite-sized quotes from the Baha'i sacred writings on, like our spiritual nature and how to live and how to pray and a relationship with our creator. And again, it was created for children, but we're all children on the spiritual path, and it's illustrated very joyfully and relatably. And it was a great experience. I have like 10 more copies of my first edition books. So I'm just deciding like what the future of it's going to be. But it was an awesome experience. It's crazy that like last time I saw you, I was working on it, and then the book's been born, and now it's like almost like fully matured, and I'm on to the next project. But it's been great. Noble Beings. Right.
Yeah, I remember you like mentioning it, and I was like, oh, that sounds so exciting. And have you brought it into like schools? What's sort of been the reception on it? It's been, I think a couple months since its release. So how's it? I'm sure you had like something in mind for like an expectation or a target. Do you feel like it's like fulfilled its purpose? Like, are you happy with how it's turned out?
I am very happy. It's been a great launch. It's been a pretty like niche market that it's sold to. Again, I've pretty much sold my initial books. It wasn't a print on demand. I actually, ordered the books and, invested in that up front.
That's the old-fashioned way.
Yeah. Well, I had I'm an artist, and the aesthetics of it were so important to me. I would like a future for the book that reaches many, many more people. And I'm not exactly sure what that is going to be, but it's definitely been a strong start. And now my vision is truly out in the world. It isn't just in my head, like people can hold it. And it's been great. So, I have YouTube videos of me reading it to children and stuff. And I do hear that like, kids are enjoying it, and parents will write me and tell me like, I heard excerpts of what you've said in my toddler's like mumbo jumbo self-talk, like they're like like quoting things and stuff. And I have done some storytelling online, like for special events and stuff like that, like author readings, but I haven't really pushed it at schools or anything, especially with there's still so much distancing and stuff going on.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. No, it sounds like a very solid start. It's just sort of the momentum will continue to compound, if you will. So that's pretty exciting. I'm glad to hear about the great reception. because that's the type of like content we need for children, coming from the teaching backgrounds. I think we talked about a little bit about that last time, but definitely the type of content. And I think it actually relates to some of the ideas I want to bring up today.
Yeah.
So I watched your video about divine civilization, and it really caught my attention. I mean, it was a couple months ago that I actually watched it. I guess this second chat has been in the works for a little while. We're both kind of busy for a bit. But I would love for you to talk about divine civilization, in correlation with the Baha'i faith, what that sort of is. And I guess sort of give a premise on when we hear that idea of, just phrase divine civilization. Like, what does that mean for you?
Yeah. So if any of your listeners are interested, that whole podcast was largely based on this one Baha'i book called The Secret of Divine Civilization. And to me, if I was just totally going to put it in my own words, divine civilization is a society that is founded on spiritual principles and comes about by an inner transformation in individuals that is then reflected in how we choose to structure society, how we choose to do business, how we choose to, organize governance and that sort of thing. So rather than saying, okay, let's just enforce and implement all these great ideas for equity and equality and distribution of resources and wealth, that it has to start with a moral and spiritual transformation of individuals, so that it's an inner out, because none of these things, in my opinion, will ever work, well, let's just make everything fair. Well, without a human element, without intelligence behind that, without discernment, not only is fair often not fair, I worked at a company and they were jacking with my schedule, my hours, and they had just hired a whole bunch of new people. And they were like, well, we have to be fair. And I'd worked there for 6 years and I had proved my worth and that I was a great lead generator. And it's like, no, that's not fair. You should test them out first. And you should, reward the 6 years of my life I've given you by honoring my schedule preference. So there's that. And then there's also like the accountability that's needed and I gave the example in that podcast, just like, the thing, if everyone in the neighborhood was going to share a lawnmower, right? Why do we need this capitalist, materialist, whatever? Everyone has their own lawnmower. How about we all share one? Well, that makes sense. We don't all need a lawnmower every day, all day. We could share. But what we need is to trust that people aren't going to steal it. We have to trust that people are going to take care of it. We have to trust that people are going to return it on time. So it's like we have to work on the individual spiritual life of people. And as that progresses, then we progressively like, okay, well, what would be a better way to organize society and education and monetary systems and whatever? So does that answer?
100%. And it's amazing because hearing you talk about this concept of divine civilization, it almost sort of fills like a hole that I've been looking to fill. You know what I mean? Like there's this an idea that I know that we need to create something that is a little better. We need to create something that is in alignment with spiritual principles. And spiritual principles, I think, very much almost take us back to a more natural way of living that is based on community and love and trust. And so this idea of divine civilization and the fact that it's laid out in the Baha'i faith and in the book that you mentioned, like it poses a solution, if you will. And I feel like we spend so much time hammering in on what the problems are that we don't even offer up what is a potential solution. What I could point out everything that's wrong in the world, but if I don't have something to replace that, it's no good. It doesn't matter. So and I loved how you pitted this idea of divine civilization versus what we're seeing take place and, in terms of the Great Reset. And I've covered that so many times on this podcast. Like, we don't need to dive out like, what is the Great Reset? What is it? All that. So, but I love how you pitted out that, or pointed out, like, the Great Reset almost sort of capitalizes on this idea for change that we know we need. And like, it takes the idea of like material goods, and it's like, well, a big principle in spirituality, detachment from materialism. Is this going to be like, I don't know if you wanted to speak on that, because I think you articulated it really well in your own video, but what sort of your thoughts are on the societal direction and agenda versus a divine civilization concept?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I think most people are good, and I do think there's it, and it's like increasingly so. There is an awakening to wanting a just society, and an awakening to wanting to be less materialistic, and those things that you mentioned. And I don't know if it's just like ego and avarice, or if it's intentional manipulation, but it does seem like those very same qualities can be, and in some cases are at present, being manipulated to get people to fall in line, to give up their rights, to do these things. And I'm very concerned about that, because like you said, like I agree with some of those ideas. I just don't, I'm like, well, who are you to be telling me to do that? And it's kind of like the joke about, all these different countries flying in private jets to some summit on climate change, right, while they're telling us to like ration our toilet paper. You know what I mean? Right. It's like, wait a second, yeah, I guess like what I was trying to call attention to in that podcast was exactly what you said. Like, could we stop arguing about, is it either or, right? Are we going to have unbridled capitalism, or are we going to take care of the environment? It's sort of like, well, okay, wait, none of us want to live on a trash pile, right? To some degree or another, we all legitimately care about the environment. And so the question in that context, for example, rather either or whatever, it should be, okay, how can we, continue to allow people to work and earn income and, enjoy their freedom of movement and autonomy? But like, what are some solutions for powering those with energy and stuff like that aren't so harmful, right. And one of the principles in the Baha'i faith is that when we get to the point where we are not using so many resources on war, and, even when we're at peace at this point in our evolution as humans, governments are still spending incredible amounts just to have the biggest and the baddest weapons, because we don't trust each other, and we probably need it, right. But when we evolve to the point where we don't have to spend all of that intelligence and money and research on weapons of mass destruction and outdoing each other, then that frees up intelligence and capital and research to, really discover like, what untapped resources does the earth have? How can we put our minds together and come up with a both and, best yet solution for all of these things?
Right. No, definitely. And it really resonates a lot with the areas that I've been focusing on. I've noticed, and certainly giving people relief in a pandemic, whether it's manufactured or not, is not a bad thing. But, we see the creation of wealth. And I think it just shows how much wealth and abundance there is that like available to everybody if we're able to actually, utilize it properly, if we're able to come up with something that, promotes. I like the idea of an equality of opportunity where people have the opportunity to self-actualize and, engage in like spiritual transformation, become who they're meant to be. I'm a believer we all kind of chose to be here in a sense, right? And but at the same time, not creating equality of outcome, which sort of makes everyone one and the same and removes individual expression. And I think when we're looking at like the Great Reset versus divine civilization, Great Reset talks about all these principles of revolutionizing and coming up with more equitable solutions, but it's very much in a dystopian fashion, if you will. And when I look at this divine civilization, I think, and one thing, when I first heard the word, it almost makes me think of the idea of a utopia, but I don't actually know if that's the right word for it. Do you have thoughts on, like, if somebody were to ask, are you just creating some unrealistic utopia? Like, what would sort of your response be to what a utopia is framed as versus like divine civilization? Because I think there's some distinct differences.
Yeah, totally. Well, I mean, the fact that utopia usually means something that's not going to happen, right? A pipe dream. And so for that reason, I do think that divine civilization is really humanity's birthright. It's what we're aiming towards. And, it's the same argument. If you talk to a caveman and tried to explain, a train to him, and then if you tried to explain an airplane to someone who lived in the days of the train, and then even 20 years ago, if you were to explain Zoom and how easy it would be to do this, and like even that would have been like, huh?
Right.
So I think we shortchange ourselves a little bit, and I'm sure there's we're always, as far as I know, humans, we're always still gonna have blood running through our veins, and if you cut yourself, you're still gonna bleed. Like, life will still have its challenges, and there may still be people who out of rebelliousness or whatever, like, want to attempt to break the law or whatever. Like, there might be a few little glitches in the system, but I think humanity is fully capable. I think people want to get together and make the world a better place. Like, I honestly believe that. And this last year in the US and the heightened energy around race dialogue and stuff, and I think that also had a lot of injected private interests, and I think a lot of that was purposely divisive. It's a whole other conversation. But I think the fact that so many people, whether they were sucked into a narrative that was only half true or not, so many people were like, yeah, I want my brothers and sisters of all shades and walks of life to have freedom and dignity and respect. Like, people are so ready. And it's just a matter, I think, of continuing to grow and mature as individuals, and then as families and communities and cities and countries, and also sort of freeing ourselves from the shackles of vested interests and propaganda and manipulation from the top down.
Right. No, definitely. And I agree with that. And I think freeing ourselves from that and rigid belief systems, and getting into the individual side of it as well. And when I think about like a divine civilization, it actually feels like something that we've been working towards all along. Like, everything that we've built up to this point has given us we've learned from it. We've grown. Like, there's a lot of people who want to pit technology as this awful pitfall, for example, and it's going to lead to an AI takeover. And it's like, well, maybe if we're not careful, yeah, but it's given us a beautiful way to communicate, way to find new information. There's more people who are hungry for knowledge because they have the access to it. So they're going to go and seek and explore. And I think the idea of that we're going to create like this utopia where there's no struggles and there's no hardship. It's actually, I don't think that's even what we should necessarily be aiming for. You know, I think it was listening to Jordan Peterson talk about, I think it was like a Dostoevsky quote, and he was talking about how if you give people utopia, everything they need, they have nothing to work for, and they just eat cake all day and they're relaxing, they will deliberately cause chaos because they get bored. You know, they're just going to get bored and they're going to throw things and they're going to throw the cake on the ground and stomp on it, things like that. So I think people were like born for challenge. We're born for opportunity. And I think that's something that previous, I guess you could say, our society, like it doesn't have that for everybody necessarily. And, you know, it's definitely, you know, we're both blessed in that regard because, you know, if we grew up in sub-Saharan Africa where it's war torn and there's civil wars, like that's a problem. You know, we're not going to have the same type of opportunity. So it's like, how do we solve those conflicts? I think it goes back to the individual transformation and making that emphasis. And I think it plays deeply into your book as well. And we're talking about kids. I think personally, that's the first step. Like, how do we get people? It's very difficult to get an adult to change their minds, get an adult to let go of their belief systems. They'll do it. But if you can instill this type of beliefs into the youth, I think that's where the solution lies. And we can sort of create it over time. I don't know if you have thoughts on that and like the education factor in this, but I feel like that's one of the main principles that I'm picking up on just in terms of divine civilization.
Yeah, my personal belief is that a huge transformation in the world is only ever a generation away, you know? And, you know, the flip side of that is I do think children and young people are being purposely targeted right now. And again, I don't know if it's just greed or what, but I'm rather grateful I don't have kids right now because there's so much newness. We're just now having the first generation come of age who's had technology in their hand their whole lives, you know, like that kind of smartphones and stuff. And then the masks and then gender issues at a very young age, like so much stuff young that's new. But yeah, on the other side, if just somehow a whole generation was raised with such a firm belief in their own spiritual connection and their spiritual nobility, and that they have a purpose here, and that they have a spark of the divine within them, and that, you know, it's good to be honest. It's like imperative, because even if you win, you lose if you've been dishonest to get there, you know?
Right.
And if people would not dream of stealing, you know, if they, all of these things, like, and it was from the inside, it wasn't like, oh, I'm afraid to go to jail. It was just like, oh, I wouldn't want to do that to my spirit. Like, oh my gosh, you know, I just got chills thinking about that. Like, that's it, you know?
Right. No, definitely. And I think that's where the paradigm shift, I think, is going to occur. And it's, you know, I've been thinking a lot about how can I, you know, coming from an education background, like actually implement that, because I just moved out to South Dakota. I'm not working in a school right now. So I have that sort of like step back, if you will, or it's like I can just sort of look at the situation from a whole and see what are our policies in education. And it very much is just sort of built on the foundation of subservience, and there's a lot of obedience and psychological. It's like we're teaching ways to think instead of how to think overall. So there isn't sort of that one, critical thinking and questioning, but also there isn't that connection to spirituality and sort of a higher purpose, you know, beyond the individual self, and a connection to everybody, all that is, and, you know, a higher power, whatever that means for anybody listening. You could insert your own word there, but so when I'm looking at the foundation of education, it's like, do we really need to, and calculus serves a purpose, but do we need to make scoring an A on your calculus exam to get into Harvard the priority, or should we start focusing on how to be a good person, how to develop honesty, how to engage in continuous self-development and tackle life's challenges? And I think that should be the essence of all education, regardless. And there's a lot of parents that are sort of switching to like homeschooling and sort of taking themselves out of the larger scale education system, because I think those flaws are being very much highlighted, if you will. There's a lot of people realizing it's not going to create an independent, beautiful expression of a human being that they're supposed to be. And that's, I kind of feel the same way about not having kids right now. It's like, I don't know what I would do to combat all of this. It's madness. It's madness because it's all about that divide and conquer. And, when we're thinking about like human beings, I guess what if we could reimagine like just what it means to be human in this world? What would sort of your thoughts be on that? Like, how could you to reimagine oneself in the grand scheme of all that is on the earth in creating this world?
Wow, what a huge question. If I could reimagine what it means to be human. Well, I do think that my children's book actually it was motivated by that idea, which is a lot of it is, children, I definitely don't believe we're born perfect. It's kind of like nature. Nature is beautiful, but it's not to say it's not improved by pruning and cultivation, all that stuff. So I think parents and mentors and teachers have a super important role in helping cultivate what is innately there. But I do think children are so connected without intellectualizing it. They're so connected to their, that spark of divinity within them, like they know they're special, and it's not like an ego thing. They just live it,
Yeah.
And they're so affectionate, and they're so loving, and they're so full of joy, and they're so in their bodies and all of that. And the vision that really moves me is if somehow we could reimagine the process of socialization and maturity, where rather than sort of stomping those things out and replacing them with diligence and self-awareness and all this stuff, which are good qualities, they're not bad. But if instead it could be more of a fluid process where you kept that innate sense of your own worth, that innate sense of love and affection and joy, and also continue to mature and grow into those more quote unquote mature qualities. I think that a lot of adults like yourself, eventually work those things back in. Right. Yeah. We sort of
that's the goal.
Right. I've lost some things. I need to reconnect and whatever. So I think that's what like our generation has been doing, like reclaiming those. But it's like, what, how might that flower grow differently if it didn't have to lose and reclaim, but it just kept going, So right. I guess it's a very simple shift. It's not a real radical thing I'm proposing, but it's kind of like, I think it could free a lot of energy and creativity if we didn't have to step back so much to go back and get those things that we left behind, Right.
100%. That's like sort of once you're in adulthood, that's like the realization you have. It's like, wait a minute, I want to actually do what I'm called to. I want to find my creative voice. I want to explore. And it's insane because, we see that in small children. And I have a 5-year-old cousin who I've been getting to see since I've moved closer to this side of the country. And it's amazing to watch the imagination unfold in just simple games that we, the idea, the game of like House or something, or, you know, even hide and seek, and just all these different games. They do these things that are just so creative and imaginative. And I'm like, wow, that was impressive. And you're 5, but it just shows the innate ability to create. And I think if we were to harness that and create an educational standard that allows children to like just run with that, and, you know, you certainly have certain points that we can teach along the ways to help prepare them for adulthood. And, you know, there's a reason we have schooling, but it's like, why aren't we building on those strengths? And it would create that society that would be thriving and would be loving and open. And I think everyone wants that in the end, even regardless of what side of the aisle they're on politically, or just the religious differences. Everybody kind of wants the same thing. And like finding that within yourself first and instilling that in children, I think that's such a beautiful solution. Such a beautiful solution. And I think about all the time how we can bring that back. And I think getting children outdoors, you know, why are we sitting at a desk for 6 hours a day when you can go climb a tree and learn probably more from that experience, you know, to a degree. So there's so much like inner child work that's done in adulthood now. And it's just like not abandoning the inner child, allowing it to play, allowing it to be free. And I think that's like the essence of freedom, if you will, if you can stay connected to that. Like freedom is almost an internal concept. I don't know if you agree with that. Like if you found, you know, we spoke a little bit about how both personally even though the world is a little chaotic, like personally we're doing pretty well. And that's generally who I'm connecting with too. Like, especially when they're coming from a spiritual background, like we're doing pretty well overall, like despite the chaos of the world. So would you say freedom is maybe sort of an internal concept, and that's how you create external freedoms and how you create a life of abundance? It starts with that inner freedom.
Yeah, 1,000,000%. I think, and that's the spiritual goal, you know, that inner peace, inner happiness, that these things aren't dependent on anything external. You know, when you can, you know, do everything you can to, you know, have a clean home or go outside and be in a beautiful place, like do what you can to have your externals reflect what you want. But I mean, you know, we all know that there are amazing stories of spiritual people who were imprisoned or, you know, ostracized and lived lives of deprivation that were not their choice, but they were still free on the inside, you know? And I think that those of us like who live in a Western culture that pretty much, we have our struggles, but we've been bored into very comfortable situations. Sometimes I think the spiritual element is almost more challenging because it's easy to forget our blessings, you know, and it's easy to be like, I really think that I would be happy if I just did some online shopping. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we distract ourselves from the spiritual that's right there. It's right there. And so I love that you brought up as freedom being an inner out. We can be free inside no matter what's going on outside of us, ideally.
Right.
But we want to do everything we can to create and maintain that external freedom as well.
Right, definitely. And when I say that, sometimes I'm like, I hope people don't hear that idea and then take it as an excuse to almost just like negate the outer world in a way. Because I think that inner freedom can be almost the foundation for helping create the outer freedoms, if you will. Like, you know, just because I feel inner peace doesn't mean I'm not going to speak up about like Great Reset or, you know, body sovereignty and just all of these things that are important externally. It doesn't negate the fact that we might be going down a slippery slope right now. And it feels like if I were to negate that just because I feel that inner peace regardless, it would almost be a form of like bypassing in a way, just spiritual bypassing. Like, I'm not going to deal with the outer world. It's too scary. It's too big of a challenge. I can't change anything. And, you know, that idea of not being able to change anything, I think, you know, we tell everybody start with yourself first, but I think there's so much power in that, just starting with the self and then impacting your family, impacting your community. Like it makes a difference, and everybody has the ability to reach anybody online in theory. I mean, you're probably not going to reach the president. I don't know, but you can make a difference and like create almost a platform just with your presence and how you use technology, and really make a difference and have open conversations and, approach difficult situations where it's normally pitted as one side versus the other. There's a lot of like, you need to choose a side in the world today. You can approach it from the gray area and, just come in with inner peace. So, and I would say, I don't know what the right word would be, encourage multiple perspectives. And I think just the encouragement of multiple perspectives that's something we've been led to disregard. People want everyone to think the same way as them. And, I just think more people need to take on that inner transformation and recognize that they're connected to all, but they're also just one perspective. Every single person can be our teacher. I think that's one of the greatest lessons I've ever learned, because I can't remember the last time I got into like a heated argument, leaving it and thinking, you're an awful person. It's like, I see, even if somebody hurts me personally, I'm like, it's hard for me to get mad at them, much to my own like dismay sometimes. Like maybe I should get mad at them, but it's like, I see where you're coming from. It's okay. So it's just the recognition that we're all one, and we can, where the collective goes, we ultimately go as a society, but just the ability to change yourself, I think, can change the collective. And people don't realize that power, if you will. I think that's the true definition of power. I don't know if you wanted to speak on that. There's no questions in there, but
yeah, I do think our power is our spiritual state and our spiritual impact. I do think that is a true source of power, and it's two-sided. It's just the power of our own being and our thought forms and the energy we're putting into the world, and then it's also the actions that we take from that place and how we interact with and impact other people. And I think the idea of spiritual or divine civilization is also a really great cure for that temptation to dismiss, like, oh, well, I'm not of the world, or this world doesn't matter, or, well, like sort of religious or spiritual meism, where you're like, well, I'll just work on my inside, or, the world's going to come to an end anyway, or like whatever. Right. Those are all ways to sort of shirk responsibility, as is the more materialist view, saying like, oh, well, that's a utopian, idea, and that's never going to happen. Both of those are ways to not engage. And I think that, this personally, I do believe that this material life is not really what we think it is. I don't think it is of the importance that it feels like when we're here. But that's, in the argument of like, oh, none of it matters. But then it's also sort of like, but everything matters, because this life is a development and a training ground. And, I guess we could get super like semantic and philosophical and stuff, but it's really like our intentions that matter, and what we're really aiming for, and how we learn to see other perspectives, like you said, and how we learn to like acknowledge that everyone has a little sliver of the truth. And if the more we put all our pieces together, the more we'll have a greater understanding. Like, those are actually the things that matter. And this material life is our opportunity to work on that,
Right. Definitely. We're spiritual beings living a physical experience, and we're meant to live that experience. We're not meant to just come here and not take that individual responsibility. We're meant to self-actualize, remember who we are, and then use that knowledge to create abundance, prosperity, love in this temporary existence. To get super philosophical, I guess this question just popped into my mind. Do you think, and I guess it kind of plays off of what we were just talking about, do you think there is like a universal meaning that can be derived from these topics, or is meaning, the idea of meaning and purpose, is that something that has to come from the individual level, or is there something that, if we look at divine civilization, can that give a collective meaning, I guess?
I can tell you've been listening to Jordan Peterson.
Oh yes, I have. Guilty as charged. No, I have no comments. Yes, I have.
I think it's both. We have our individual psyche and relationship with ourself and with the divine, and then there's also kind of more universal principles of why we're here. In my faith, there's one prayer that we are to say every day. There's actually 3 different versions you can choose from: the short, the medium, or the long. But it's one of these prayers we're to say every day. And the short one is what I usually say. And it's to be said sometime in the afternoon. And it says, I bear witness that thou hast created me to know thee, so to know God, and to worship thee. And it goes on. But, to me, it's like to know God and in all that whole like sort of kaleidoscope of what that means, and then to worship God. And I think that is to pray, and that is, the ideas of worship that pop into our head. But it's also like, well, how do we express that worship to the world? How do we show our loyalty to our maker by how we treat other people and how we spend our time and how we engage in our own profession and our own work? And that's the purpose of why we're here.
Right. Definitely. And I definitely agree with that. And I think something as I've been doing, reading and listening to Jordan Peterson and listening to other podcasts, I've really come to realize that one of the things I think our current like societal model lacks is that meaning. And I think meaning is something that can be constructed on the individual level, but because society isn't providing it, a lot of people don't have a deeper connection to meaning and deeper connection to purpose. And, that creates nihilism, and that creates division. It creates a lot of the issues that we're seeing sort of manifest its ugly head right now. Like it's coming to fruition. And I think something of society's past, the last, I feel like this is almost a new phenomenon, because there has been that, I guess you could say what you will about certain religions and institutions and whatever, that has its pros and cons. But there was always sort of almost that collective belief of a higher power in almost all societies. In this modern material world, there isn't that connection to a higher power. And I wonder if that's the reason we're seeing all of this. And I personally would say so, if I'm going to put my opinion out there. And, I don't necessarily believe in the idea that certain religious ideologies should influence all politics or should influence all schooling. And, we should really respect all the individual differences in that. But that lack of a collective meaning and that lack of a collective, like, what are we working towards, has brought a lot of chaos. And I think just the idea of divine civilization, it feels like to me, and I'm sure you could speak on this a little better, like it feels like there isn't necessarily one end goal in mind, like creating that quote unquote like utopia, but it's like a continual growth process of evolving and ascending, expanding and creating. Like there isn't the divine civilization, that it's connected to that higher power, and that higher power is encouraging in continuous growth and continuous self-actualization. I don't know. I feel like I'm on the right track with that. I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, but
Yeah. And I think that's the incredible beauty of it. And that's where we limit ourselves, or like, saying something's utopia or whatever. And I don't know what people are picturing who think that, but they might, think that I'm suggesting that, yeah, we'll build this perfect world and then we just sit around and eat cake all day, But rather, we've never had a perfect world. And let's not use the word perfect. Let's say a divine civilization. So to even try to like argue like, anything about that, we really can't, because we have to get there. Like, we don't know what that's exactly going to look like. Again, there are certain things that are mapped out and articulated in the Baha'i faith and stuff. But where I'm going with this is that, yes, it is continuous. Once humanity to some form gets to that point, that's going to open up so many other possibilities that right now, with our, Neanderthal understanding of this concept, we can't even imagine, it's, and it's like this way with art, with so many things. Like when you're, like when I do a painting, I'm a painter. I don't know if your listeners know that, but the way I work is I literally paint to see where it goes. Like, I'm excited. It's like packing for a trip, and I show up to do the legwork, and I'm doing the thing, but I honestly don't know what the destination is, but I know it's going to be beautiful and amazing, because I'm not going to stop till I get there. And usually the painting will let me know, like, I'll know when it's there, But it's a similar thing that we're talking about here, that we can talk about, well, there's going to be, a just financial system, and we're going to have a universal auxiliary language so we can all communicate, but we're also going to have our own languages so we don't lose our culture and all this stuff. But we don't really know. And when our human intelligence is directed towards finding solutions and exploring the untapped resources that the earth has to provide with reverence and, not exploiting it, like, we don't know what else that's going to open up,
Right. It feels like just building the foundational, like, spiritual principles is the doorway, right? We don't need to know all of these fine, intricate details of this is how this is going to be set up, and this and that and this. And it's very, I think, natural to want to have the instant, like, the instant knowing of how everything is going to work. But that's just not how life works. Like, we never know. I don't know what's going to happen later on today. I could get off this podcast and fall down the stairs. Like, it's certainly, I hope that doesn't happen, but it's like, life is a grand mystery. And I think as long as you're living in in alignment with certain principles, the world will essentially create itself around you based on those principles. I don't know if I worded that correctly, but it'll you kind of manifest that reality. Like, we've talked about, we both have this space of inner peace within us right now. And despite there being so much chaos in the external world, we're still living in our own world that is of inner peace. So it's, I think if everybody can come into alignment with, the core principles that we've really talked about in this podcast, and then outlines in the Baha'i faith, that is going to be the catalyst. We don't need to imagine, like, we don't need to come up with all of the physical components. Like, they will come when they're ready to show themselves, if you will. And that's why right now there's a lot of people feeling sort of not hopeless, but there's a lot of fear and anxieties. And I'm certainly, I'm not, I guess you could say I'm prone to them on occasion. Like, I'll recognize when fear manifests itself, but like, overall, my feeling is like, I'm fairly optimistic, fairly hopeful, because, I see more people every day who are coming from this space of inner peace. And I recognize that it like, if we weren't ready to sort of transform society, I don't think such a golden opportunity would be presenting itself to do so. Like there's everything that is wrong has sort of shown us, like we've seen the deepest of the shadows at this point. And it's like, well, how do we fix that? It's through the light, it's through love, it's through connection. And so I personally feel optimistic. I feel hopeful. I don't know if you feel the same way. I get the feeling that you do. And it's, I just feel like it's a beautiful time to be alive, you know? Like this is, what a great opportunity.
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
So I don't know if you wanted to speak on that. That was sort of the point I was making, but it's, I guess you could also say like, what would be your thoughts on finding this within yourself? If somebody asked like, you know, I want to feel that inner peace. I want to bring this about. Like I feel your energy and resonate with what you're saying, but don't have the tools, the practices to, you know, bring that into my own life. What would sort of your recommendation be?
Well, that we've already made a huge leap, you know, to even be asking that question. And I just, there's something in me that wants to be very careful that I'm not like sounding like, well, as someone who has it all figured out, this would be my answer.
Right.
You know
right. I mean? Nobody has it figured out, regardless of what they say.
Right. I love the idea of a spiritual path, you know, and the path, you know, we say it and maybe we think like, oh yes, you know, it sounds so, you know, mystical and magical, but it's more like you have blisters on your feet and there's a pebble in your shoe and you're getting sweaty and, you know, that sort of thing. But I think there's tremendous power in having the humility to ask the question, whether it's this hypothetical person asking you or me, and more importantly, you know, asking their own spirit, like literally asking your own heart, like how often do we really tune in to that intelligence within us, that, you know, vibrant life inside of us? And, you know, maybe we don't feel guided by it because we're so untrained at listening to it. And then you know, I do believe in prayer, like so much so. And one of the prayers that I've said a lot, especially this last year, is like, please help me see the truth, you know, or, you know, please show me the reality of this situation. And it can be very mundane. I mean, it could be a job offer and I kind of can't tell and I'm ambivalent. It's like, please show me the reality of this. So, and I would say those things, just the listening and the asking, and then also, you know, putting some attention to learning about it. I mean, if you were going to buy a car, you would do research about it, you know, dive in a little bit.
Right. Don't be afraid to dive in. That can definitely be. Wanting to know the truth, I think, is the most noble pursuit of all of them, because the truth is not always, I guess I was going to say it's not always our friend. I think the truth is always our friend, but the truth can be, contain a lot of shadows, can be quite dark. And, you know, I've talked to my mom about this on occasion. And she's like, you know, don't you think sometimes it would just be better to not know all of this? And part of me wants to say yes, but then another part is like, nah, like it's good. It's good to like just seek truth. It's good to be on this like a journey. You know, it's a lifelong journey. So it's, you know, truly a beautiful pursuit. So we're at about.
I want to say one thing about that because I understand both sides of that, and you know, it's like, but what just came to me, the first page of my children's book is this quote again from the Baha'i writings, and it says, "Truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues." And you know, virtues are love and joy and caring and generosity, the fluffy ones, you know, or virtues are discipline and excellence and, community, whatever these things are that people value, they're only stable, right? You think of a foundation. You need a foundation for stability if they're founded on truthfulness.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. And I would agree with that. And I think there's so much, I think it's impossible to know all the truth, but there is always more truth that you can continue to find. That's why, like I was saying, everybody can be your teacher because they know something that you don't know. And, and you could teach me something, I could teach you something. There's a reciprocity in that, and just continuing the journey in quest for truth, because if you ask for it, it will find you. Like it will, like it'll come rearing its head. And I think the concept of divine civilization, that is truth, that is honesty, that is the beauty in that, because when we can all sort of come to that level of truth, and truth about the nature of ourselves, truth in our communications, just truth in all aspects, because it's such a deep and profound concept when you unpack it, that will create what we're envisioning. It's like I can't imagine it, but I can really like feel it. I think that's the takeaway I get from divine civilization. I can feel it within me, and it's like, all right, let's bring it out. Here it is.
Out. That's right. Cool.
Bring that to the collective. Awesome. So we're at about an hour. This has been a really fun conversation. Like I feel like I'm leaving this with a deeper knowing of like I don't know. I'm feeling very optimistic, and like the game plan feels a little laid out for me in a way. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, Jackie, where would you want to send the listeners? To interact with you. Maybe buy your book. I know you only have a few copies left, so this is going to be like it's going to be like limited edition.
That's right.
So where would you like to send the listeners?
Sure thing. So my hub is my website, Jacqueline Claire Art, and everything spelled the old-fashioned traditional ways, Jacqueline Claire Art. And that's also my handle on Facebook and Instagram. And YouTube is Jacqueline-Claire. So yeah, and I have a podcast, Spiritual Conversation with Jacqueline Claire. So all of those places are great places. Sign up for my email list to get updates.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll put that all in the episode description. People can just scroll on down. One click away. It's right there.
And please do. Like, I know that your listeners, I would really enjoy, interacting with and that sort of thing, because I love what you're putting out so much. Like, I like every single post you make. And so all of your listeners, I really hope they find me, Jacqueline Claire Art, and connect, because you guys are groovy people.
Oh, and I'm sure they appreciate that. You're a groovy person as well. It's definitely on the same wavelength. Like, we're all sort of approaching, we see where the truth in that's revealing itself, and we're looking for that common solution on a similar wavelength. Found that inner peace. Fifth Dimension community is growing, and it's fun, and I'm glad you're a part of it. It's fun. So definitely have you back on in the near future. I'd love to do another one.
Woo! 3 times.
There's only been one. Has there been anyone who's done 3? There may have been one person who's done 3 podcasts, and I can't remember who it is, and they're probably going to get angry. But that is a above VIP exclusive list. So
yeah. Yeah. What would be even more so is if your listeners, petition, like, hey, have Jacqueline Claire back on. You get all these messages. Yes, we want a 3rd round. Yes.
Absolutely. The second I start receiving those messages, I'm going to let you know, and the petition is going to be underway. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, Jackie, thank you so much for coming on again. I really enjoyed it. And like I said, let's do it again soon.
Lots of fun. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. We'll stop the